In Scotland, there is a group of islands called the New Hebrides Islands, and they are on the off the northwestern coast of Scotland. And I think probably the nearest island is maybe 45 miles from the mainland. I think the biggest island is called Lewis. One of my favorites is called Skye, because I thought that was a neat name. Anyway, most people from the mainland of Scotland don't visit those islands because the water in the channels between the mainland and the islands is very choppy. And so these islands have remained very isolated for as long as anyone can remember. The most interesting thing that I have recently heard about them, which I vaguely knew but began to piece it together, the Holy Spirit began to help me piece it together, was that starting, at least since we can, since history has been recording, starting in the early 1800s, and I want to say around 1820, revival broke out in those New Hebrides Islands. And you have to remember, these are very desolate places. There are not very many people there. It's mainly people who raise sheep. They're known for their wool, their kilts, and fishing. And so very isolated, not a lot of visitors from other countries, much less even Scotland. Very harsh environment, as you can well imagine. They get the first hit from all the Atlantic storms. So very hardy people. But anyway, starting at least in recorded history, revival broke out there in the 1820s. I mean, to the point where every person, I think, was converted on these islands, and they made it a mandate that Bible had to be taught in their schools, and it was like the main thing that was taught in their schools. And since there wasn't much form of entertainment at night, after dinner, their main form of entertainment or interaction was the mother and the father, or one or the other, would sit down and read the Bible and tell Bible stories to their children. And this tradition continued. And then another revival broke out, I think, in the latter part of the 1800s. Anyway, a lot of revivals have broken out there. And then you come to the early 1900s, and there's a story, and it's a true story. This young girl brought up in the same traditions, on the Isle of Lewis, and her parents every night read her from the Bible, told her Bible stories. It was embedded in her. And I think when she was about 20, she immigrated to the United States. So this was probably, I would say, early, maybe 1920s, 1930s. I don't have the exact date on that. She immigrated to the United States and became a nanny for a very, prominent families in New York area. I think it's New York. Anyway, she eventually met and married an interesting up-and-coming entrepreneur businessman, and they began to have children. And so one of their children, and she continued that tradition. She continued, even with her children. She would read every night from the Bible and tell them Bible stories every night. It was ingrained in them. So one of her children is actually named Donald Trump. And I usually don't make political commentary, but when I heard the rest of the story of this, something ignited deep in my spirit, because this man has in his genetic DNA revival on his mother's side. And it just blessed me to no end to find out that he came from a land, his DNA, his ancestral DNA actually has revival in it. And I think that we can take not just great hope, but great joy that, and can pray for that igniting in him of that revival in his very DNA. In Jesus' name. So I feel like, who is that guy that used to say the rest of the story? That is the rest of the story.